Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. Before we get too far into the video, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, that really helps to get my channel promoted, and I really appreciate that. I also love it when people leave comments, so if you feel like it, I'm open to questions, constructive criticism, ideas for videos are always nice, and I always like to hear how you guys do things. So at the last show I was at, I bought this batch of multicolored little Tourmaline cabs, and I've really enjoyed using them in a couple of pieces, and I think I'm going to use some more of those tonight on a ring that I'm going to make. It's going to be kind of Art Deco-ish or Art Moderne, sort of streamlined, but with linear shapes and some stones lined up on the top. I think it'll be kind of a fun ring, and we'll see how it goes. But before we get started, I wanted to thank some groups of people. My patrons over on Patreon are my core group of supporters, and I really appreciate not only the financial contribution, but the great community that they've created over there. It's a super nice group of people with a lot of knowledge and a lot of artistic skills. So thank you for being that way, you guys. I do have a brand new patron, Michelle L. Thank you for signing up. I really appreciate your support. I'm really glad you signed up, and I think that you'll also find that the group of people over there is super nice. So thanks for that. The other group of supporters are my YouTube subscribers, and we just passed 15,500, which is amazing. Thank you for that. Thank you especially for the nice comments. It's really nice when people tell me that they're getting something out of these or that I've helped them in some way. That's gratifying and makes me feel like I'm doing something good here, so thank you for that. I do also appreciate the super thanks and the buy me a coffees. Those help with the cost of materials, which are crazy expensive right now, so thank you for that. Alright, with those things being said, let's get started on this ring. This is one of my design idea sketchbooks that you can get on my merch store if you're interested. The newer ones have some different informational stuff on the back. This one has a conversion chart. It goes from fractions of an inch to decimals to millimeters, which I find useful because I still think in fractions of an inch, but I'm trying to learn to think in millimeters. So it's more useful for jewelry, I think. It also has a nice grid in the background, which helps me to keep things sort of symmetrical because I'm not terribly good at drawing stuff. But all right. So get yourself one of those on the merch store over there. And here's what I'm going to do today. I have, like I said, I bought a bunch of these little kind of party-colored tourmaline cabs. I think they're about 5 or 6 millimeters. I don't remember. But there are all sorts of fun variations of yellows, blues, greens, pinks, reds. So there's a lot of variety there, and I think it's going to make for kind of a cool ring here. As you can see, it's kind of going to look like a stoplight, but let me put these ones away. If I can avoid dropping them all on the ground. The amount of hours I spend crawling around on the ground looking for a stone that I dropped is far too high. Okay, so I picked out a kind of a pink one, a yellow one, and a green one because I thought that would make for a nice combination. And I think those stones go together pretty well. And so what we'll be doing is, and I did part of this in advance because I knew it was going to take a while, and I kind of hand forged this piece of 18 gauge sheet so that it has kind of a lozenge shape. And I just used my dapping block and some dapping punches, as well as my plastic hammer and my bench block, which is just a flat metal surface, until I got it kind of shaped how I wanted it to be. And using the dapping punches, as a way to forge the ends of this here using my chasing hammer, like this little hammer here, you know, shaping it like that. So it took a little bit of like sculpting with the hammer here, and then I filed it down so it's relatively flat. What I want to do is I want to mount bezels, 3 bezels in a row up here. So the other thing we're going to do is I'm going to make kind of like what would normally be a bezel, except out of 18 gauge sterling, a hollow form kind of, and we're going to make that exactly the shape of this, and then we'll solder this on top of it so we have kind of some depth to it. And then we'll create a band out of 18 gauge sheet, which is 1.02 millimeters if I remember right. The bezel I'm going to use for these is going to be 3/16 inch fine silver bezel in 26 gauge, which is 4.76 millimeters tall, and I think it's 0.41 millimeters in thickness. And I'll probably do one bezel on camera, and then I'll do the other two bezels off of camera, so you don't have to watch me do the same thing over and over again. So basically we'll make a bezel, we'll get this complete by creating that little base for it, and then we'll mount those bezels. To mount those bezels, this is a curved surface, so we're going to have to shape the bottom of the bezel a little bit using a rotary tool, and that'll be pretty easy to do, I think. But then make sure we get them kind of lined up nice and centered, which is kind of problematic for me sometimes. So let's make a bezel for one of these guys. How about we do the pink one? They're all pretty much the same size. Okay, so here's the bezel. Let's flatten this out. If you've never been to my channel before, I mostly use hard silver sheet solder. This is a little tiny piece of it. I use a liquid flux that I dribble on mostly. My torch is a Silversmith model. It's got these little louvers here so it draws in atmospheric air. It's an air acetylene torch rather than an oxyacetylene torch, so it's not near as hot as an oxyacetylene, but it's about perfect for silversmithing in my opinion. Alright, oh, and I use a #1 tip. So let's file the end of this flat. This is much taller bezel than I really probably need, but since we're adapting it to a curve surface, we're going to be removing some of it anyway, and then I'll file it down to the height that I want it to be. So it just gives me more options. We'll see if I'm on my game. I'm already kind of tired out from doing a bunch of chores today. We'll just kind of pre-shape it a little bit and then snug it up around there. Find something sharp to make a scratch, and we're going to want to leave a little bit extra to compensate for filing. And the last video I did on Saturday was how to make a silver bell. So I've got silver bells stuck in my head. I keep having that song play over and over in my head, and I can't seem to shake it. That seemed like a pretty popular video. People really seem to like that one. So I may have to revisit some other kind of bell at some point. We'll just do a little reshaping. I think we hit the size right on the nose on that one. Okay, I'll be right back. I'm going to make 2 more of those for the other 2 stones, and then we'll start making that base piece. So I'll be right back. So I've got 3 bezels. And I had a sort of an epiphany. Instead of using 18 gauge sheet for the edge piece here that's going to be the base underneath this lozenge shape, I thought, why don't I just roll some 12 gauge square, which is 2.01 millimeters thick, through my rolling mill and flatten it out so it's similar to 18 gauge, and that'll give me a nice consistent top without having to file or anything. So I may still run a file across it just to make sure we're completely flat, but after we make it into the shape that this is going to be. So first I'm going to anneal this though, because I rolled it through the rolling mill so it's really springy, and that'll soften it up. If you're new to this, annealing is where it's the opposite of work hardening, basically. Work hardening is like silver, like most metals. As you hit it or twist it or bend it or compress it, it gets harder and harder. And the way to soften it back up is to heat it up to kind of a dull red color. And that re-randomizes the molecules in the metal, and so it softens back up again. And it's a lot more easy to bend again. And it's kind of a reddish hue to it now. Just kind of let it cool down for a minute. And after it cools for a minute or two, then you can usually cool it off the rest of the way in some water. We'll just file that nice and flat. If you need to, use your miter vise jig, if you got one of those. I'm going to do some manual shaping here. Try and get this to match up as close to the profile of this thing as possible. And I'm not going to start the end of it anywhere near the ends, kind of in the middle one of these sides. So from there we'll just kind of do this. Sometimes, in order to get the bends in the right place, helps me if I use my marker to kind of mark where I should start the bend. It's pretty good for a first attempt. Don't usually get it that close on things like this. I'm not too concerned about the exactness of the shape right now, but I do want to get the size as close as I possibly can. Then we'll solder the ends of these two closed, and then we'll do some shaping and try and solder these two together. So honestly, I'd rather, you know, if I was going to err on this, I'd rather err on the side where it's too big, because then I can, you know, cut it on the solder joint and take a little bit out and resolder it. It's much harder to add some stuff in my opinion. One of the things I do that not everybody does is I do pick soldering, and that's where I use a titanium pick. I heat up the solder till it melts into a little ball and pick it up on the end of the pick. Heat my piece until it's the right temperature and then just touch it where I want it to go. It's a really easy way to get solder where you want it to go and the amount that you want it to be there. And with a little practice, it's not too hard to learn. So I'll put a link up there for a video if you're interested. Let's show you how it works. Okay, let me file the top flat to make sure everything sits at the same level. I think that's pretty good. So I think you could do this in a number of ways. You could pre-melt some solder on the top of that if you wanted to, although it's going to make it hard to get it to sit flat then. I think what I'll do is I'm going to flux it, flip it over on top of it, and then I'm going to pick solder from the side just to see how that goes. That usually works pretty well for me. You could also use, you know, paste solder or something like that if you wanted to. Everybody's got their solder tricks. I had never really tried paste solder until recently. Well, let's give that a try and see how that works. Okay, let's cool it down and take a peek at it. I don't see any gaps, so I think I'm just going to spend a little time filing this down and smoothing it out. pretty symmetrical. I'm going to take my rotary tool and use an abrasive white wheel, which is one of the coarser ones, which is the coarsest one, I think, and do a little fine tuning on this. And then we can place those bezels on here, I think. Okay, I'm going to go get that cleaned up with the Dremel. Okay, so just as a test run, I soldered one of them on there, the center one, and I tried to get it as centered as I could. Looks like I might be a little bit off to one side, but what we need to do now is shape the bottoms of these so that they match the curve there. And the way to do that is I usually try and get them when I'm soldering a bezel to a curved surface. I'm going to cup that out like this, and then we'll keep testing it until we get it to fit right on there nice. So I'll just be, you could either use your file if you wanted to, although I have better luck using one of those abrasive white with a rotary tool and just kind of grinding it away until it's a nice curve like that. So you can go do one of those if you want. So generally, just cut a little notch here. And I'll try and curve that into it. A lot of people, when they're doing stuff like this, they put a piece of sandpaper on their ring mandrel or something, or another curved surface. Use that as a way to do that. So I'm just looking to see how close I am. And I could do a little bit more shaping. That's pretty close. Not bad for a first go around. This side needs a little more smoothness. That's pretty good. I think I'll stick with that one. Then I'll just do this other one. I'll be right back. So I've got those lined up reasonably well, I think. This one a little bit. I have them pretty good, and then I move them a little bit, and then they're not as good. That's going to have to be. There they go. So what I'll do is I'll flux those, and I'm going to dry the flux kind of slowly so it doesn't move them around too much. Throw some solder into each of these on the generous side. Now most of the mass on this one is in that big part on the bottom. The bezels are pretty small, so most of the heat needs to get pumped into that lower piece. The bezels being exposed to the heat from above will get hot just in general anyway. Okay, a couple of things happened. One was that one end of this started to slump a little bit because I got it a little bit too hot. And so I did a little bit of rebuilding with laying some sheet on there and soldering it down and then smoothing it out. And I think I mostly repaired it. It's not ideal, but I'm going to go with it for this one. And I'll do a little more shaping when we get to this polishing stage. But the kind of band I'm going to put on here is going to be like that. And so I've cut myself a piece of 18 gauge and kind of scribed out how I want the band to be. And so we'll do a little sawing to get that off of there. These inside curves you can't just cut with the shears, unfortunately. So we'll go do that, and then we'll attach these two together and see how it looks. So then we'll pickle it and get it all cleaned up and set the stones. So let's go do some sawing. So I've got those cleaned up a little bit, and let's go ahead and make it into a band. So in order to solder this in here, right now the ends of these are going like this. So I'm going to need to file them so they're vertical to match the vertical sides of this thing here. So I'm going to try and get that to be nice and straight up and down. That looks pretty good. What if I set this I do it like that, none of it can really fall off, so I will cut a little bit of solder and we'll try and solder it along each side. I will do a little cleanup again, and we'll get this all smoothed out nice and pickled, and then we'll set the stones and polish. So I'll be back. So I've got everything kind of assembled and polished up for the most part. I might do a little further polishing after I'm done with this. I've set the green one and the yellow one. I did take a little silver disc on top of a piece of tag board. Silver disc I polished to as high a polish as I could get because I didn't want to do an open back on this one because I thought it would dull the stones. But I do this a little differently than some people. I use the flat side of my chain nose pliers as a bezel pusher. We'll just go straight in like this. Okay, last step is called burnishing, and I use the rounded outer part of my chain nose pliers. And that's where you just rub that top edge where the two come together, the stone and the bezel. Smooth it out and compress it. So that's kind of what I was shooting for. I will do a little bit further cleanup with my rotary tool on the tops of those bezels, and then I'll try and get some better pictures. Okay, well, that was a 3-stone tourmaline ring. We may call it a traffic light ring because it kind of looks like a traffic light, but I don't know, we'll figure it out. If you enjoyed that, make sure to hit the like button before you leave. And I'd love it if you took a moment and went over to my main channel page and checked out some more of my videos. I have over 400 videos now. I've been doing 3 per week for almost 3 years now. And there's a lot of content there. And there's a lot of content at different skill levels. So if you're looking for projects in different difficulty levels, check out the various playlists that I have there. There's a beginner playlist, an intermediate playlist, and an advanced playlist. So there's also tons of other stuff. Check it out, subscribe to my channel, and don't forget to hit the video description down below. There's some important links there. You can get yourself one of those nice design idea books I talked about at the beginning. You can download my ebook, which is that guide to last year's YouTube tutorials. There's also a link to my Patreon if you want to find out more about that community. So thanks for watching. Take care. Happy silversmithing.